Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Fergdonell, the publisher of Plumbing and HVAC magazine, and we're here with Martin Luymes. I'm just going to wait for a little bit for people to come in. Looks like its numbers are growing quickly, so we'll wait a minute or two, and then I'll introduce Martin, and we'll learn all about what's happening with HRAI and the whole decarbonization thing. But yes, thank you all for joining us too. It's great that you're able to hang out and learn this afternoon. Got some great speakers ahead. So okay, I think we're pretty good now. So I will start introducing Martin Luymes. If you don't know, is the Vice President Government and Stakeholder Relations for the Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Institute of Canada, or HRAI, which is Canada's association for the HVACR industry. He is responsible for government relations and industry advocacy work for the association. And that's really about it. So let me, for this, I'll turn it over to Martin. And if you have any questions, there is a chat in the right-hand side of the page. You can add your questions in the chat, and I will bring them to Martin, and we can kind of go from there. Okay, over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to Plumbing and HVAC magazine for including me in this day of training. I have to say that I am not a heat pump expert, so being part of a heat pump technical training day is probably not a great fit for me and my expertise. I hopefully can stick around and learn a few things myself from some of the other speakers, but I think what I've been asked to do is to give a bit of an overview of what's happening with governments and HRAI's engagement with government on policies and regulations and directions being taken by government that are creating the context for this shift to heat pump technologies. It's not by accident that all of this is happening. It's very much being driven by government policy. So I'll talk a little bit about that today, and I'll mix in some other observations about what's happening in the industry. But really, the theme around all of the things I'll be talking about is climate. Almost all of the policies, almost all the regulations that I'll be referencing are driven by a focus on action around climate change, and including the refrigerant transition and other matters. So these are the things I want to talk about. The first is what broadly we call the energy transition, decarbonization policy, whatever term you want to use, climate action. Very closely connected to that, though having a slightly different impact in the industry, is the refrigerant transition. A third issue I want to dive into a little bit because it's so important for our contracting members is the workforce transition. Again, largely being driven by a focus on climate action. And then I want to touch a little bit, just because it's become a bit of a thing in the last little while, about industry consolidation and what that might mean. And again, believe it or not, some of this industry consolidation is being driven by capital, by investors who have an interest in our sector because of what the sector can do in relation to a changing climate. So I can't, I'm not going to assume anything about who's on the call and what you know about HRAI, but I really have to tell you who we are and what my platform is. So HRAI is National Trade Association, as Mark said, and we have manufacturers, wholesalers, and contractors as members, as well as associates, which includes colleges, utilities, and a variety of others, designers, engineers, and so on. And we are the association representing everything to do with HVACR, which includes space and heating and cooling, domestic hot water heating, ventilation and indoor air quality, refrigeration processes, and building control systems. It's at least a $12 billion industry. It's probably closer to 15 billion these days. That number's a little bit out of date. And as people on the call will know, we employ tens of thousands of Canadians across the country. We provide at HRAI a variety of services. There's the work I do with a team of professionals. We do industry advocacy with government and act to the extent we can as the voice of the HVACR industry in Canada. Excuse me. We also do a lot of industry training of technical nature and some business management training. We have some great programs in that area right now. We run a trade show called CFPX that most of you will be familiar with. Lots of work in communications. We have conferences. In fact, we have our annual meeting in Vancouver just starting this weekend and Sunday. Hopefully some of you will be there. And we do a variety of other programs, many of which are, again, driven by environmental considerations, like our environmental stewardship programs, RMC, and the thermostat recovery program, and so on. We work with a variety of other other associations in representing the industry. We have tight relationships with all of these other organizations, some based in the US, some regional here in Canada, some Canadian associations that have a slightly different mandate, but we work closely with these and others that aren't shown. So the first thing I want to talk about is what we call the energy transition, also known as decarbonization policy. Some of you might remember we've talked a lot in the last year or so about the green building strategy. And you'll see that document shown on the screen was prepared in July 2022. So 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, that document was released. And, this is 6 or 7 years into the mandate of the federal government that they released this document. It was a long-awaited thing, and it was really meant to be the start of a discussion. So what prompted the green building strategy was a recognition by the federal government that Canada is lagging in its progress towards the various goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, which said, we're going to decarbonize. It said a lot of things about how we're going to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. But for our sector, for the buildings sector, the intention is to be carbon free in new homes and buildings by 2030, and for all buildings in Canada by 2050. We're not getting there very quickly. Emissions reductions are not going down to the degree that they should be. You see Canada's in that red bar at the very top. The rate of change has actually been on the plus side. So we've actually seen emissions increasing, not reducing, over the last 25 years. So that's concerning to the government because they have a mandate and a commitment to reducing carbon. So they said we need to do more. And pardon me, some of the things among other things they said we have to do, they said we're seeing these trends going in the wrong direction. We need to retrofit homes and buildings at a much greater rate than we are today. We're currently retrofitting homes and buildings at a rate of about 1% per year. And they're saying we need to bring that up to somewhere between 3 and 5%. So let's just say we need a quadrupling of the volume of retrofitting of homes and buildings. And by that, they don't mean just replacing like for like. They mean literally switching from gas furnaces to heat pumps, or from carbon burning fuels of whatever type to electrified forms of heating. So we're not advancing at the rate that the government says we need to advance in order to meet our fairly aggressive policy targets. So the Green Buildings Strategy, as I said, introduced as a discussion document in 2022, involves a bundle of policy measures that are aimed at promoting decarbonization in the building sector. And the biggest chunk of all of how we're going to do that is through HVAC upgrades. There's lots of other ways to make homes and buildings more efficient, through treating the envelope and windows and various other measures. Just energy efficiency measures can deliver a lot of carbon reduction as well, just obviously by extension. But to really eliminate carbon means switching out how we heat these homes and buildings. So there's a real reliance on HVAC. Consultation started 2 years ago, ended a year ago. And then for various reasons, some of you might have heard me talk about this before at other HRAI events. We were waiting for more than a year for the results of that consultation to be shared with the public. And while we were bugging NRCan and others federally, like, why haven't we heard this? What are you waiting for? The industry needs to know in advance where you're going. We heard responses like, well, this is a more complicated issue than it first appears. which is not a surprising message. We knew that in the industry, and that, you know, it's really important what kinds of measures are rolled out. And I think the government realized there's various paths they could take, all of them fraught with some difficulty. So I think it meant that what we thought, we interpreted that to mean this is going to be a very thoughtful set of programs and policies. And let's just say the green building strategy was announced about 2 months ago. You probably haven't heard that much about it. If you have, you probably heard it from us, or maybe you follow these things closely and you made a point of tuning in. But most Canadians haven't really paid attention to what came out of it. And so the question is, after all of our consultation with government, what did we get? What did the industry get as a result? And I don't mean like what policies are they rolling out? And this is how I would describe what we got. If you're not familiar with what that image implies, some would call that a big nothing burger. We didn't really get very much that I would consider to be substantive, that says, okay, we're taking a new course, we're driving towards some new goals, we're, you know, here's the policies we have in place. A lot of it was restated or reintroduced measures that had already been announced previously. But I'll talk a little bit about what is in the green building strategy rather than talking about what isn't there. One that is quite important for our sector is there's a commitment where the government is saying we will, without a specific time period, they've not said how quickly or how long it will take to do this, but they're going to basically ban one-way air conditioners. So rather than anyone ever being able to put an air conditioning system only into a home or a building, those units will have to be capable of heating and cooling, which means heat pumps, obviously. So that's a learning the government had. You know, this technology can be converted relatively simply to provide heating as well as cooling. So why in Canada would we ever be including air conditioning only systems? We should specify heat pumps. So they made that commitment without any real details about how that changeover will be managed. They've talked about reducing embodied carbon and federal investments in public infrastructure. They're talking about all federal buildings and crown corporations achieving net zero emissions. These are all things, obviously, that are well within the control of the federal government in their spending power. They're the biggest landlord in the country, so they have a lot of buildings that they can decarbonize. That will be probably good for our industry because a lot of that work will fall to our members. They're talking about modernizing the Energy Efficiency Act. We're not really sure what that means other than an intention to make changes to energy efficiency regulations more quickly and more in line with what's happening in other jurisdictions, particularly the US. And they've, something everyone's been kind of waiting for, they said in the wake of greener homes, they said at the time, there will be a new version of greener homes coming. It will be called the Canada Greener Homes Affordability Program. And it will look, and it'll be somewhat different than the previous version of the program in the following ways. First, it will be what they call a direct install program, meaning there will be no charge to participants. It will be a switch out program where you will have your equipment switched out at no cost to the user. That means much larger grants, more typically around $20,000, but certainly not the $5,000. Part of the reason for this is the feedback they received from greener homes, or as a result of greener homes, there were some significant criticisms. Some came from our industry and some came from the public, but they were along the lines of, a lot of the grants that were being distributed to Canadians were going to people of greater than average income. A lot of people who were being rewarded for making decisions that they would have made otherwise. They were already committed to making changes in their homes, to decarbonizing, and they got a pat in the back with $5,000. Not bad for our industry, but from a public policy standpoint, the government felt that they weren't reaching all the right targets, and a lot of people who have means to do so don't really need help from government to switch over to a heat pump. So it's going to be more focused on income qualified Canadians. There, again, no definition of what that means. We've heard terms like any Canadian below the median income, which literally means below 50%, whatever the median of income is in Canada, anyone below that. So that would mean literally 50% of Canadian households would qualify. That's a pretty big group. So I'm not sure if the government will commit to truly supporting that. I don't know that would be a pretty large expenditure. The concern we have right now is it's questions around who will deliver. If they do a direct install program, it won't be available to any and all contractors. They would probably want to contract with a firm or multiple firms where they could actually be confident that the pricing will match what they need. So that's a challenge. We've just started conversations with NRCan about what that might look like, but we've expressed some concerns about how they might want to control the market. Having said that, the other criticism they heard from lots of people in our industry was that under greener homes, it really seemed like anyone could offer a rebate, that there was no precondition that the work had to be done by qualified, certified HVAC contractors who really know their way around heat pumps. And as a result, many heat pumps were installed. There's lots of evidence for this now that aren't properly installed, weren't sized correctly. Many of them wired only for cooling. So they're seeing some of that and saying, we need to have a little more say in who does the work. We would support, HRAI has in principle supported that only competent kind of pre-qualified HVAC contractors should access these programs. Hopefully they hear that message and we have cleaner delivery of a future version of this program. We have some time because they're saying they won't introduce that program until the spring of 2025. They're also looking at, for new home construction, they're looking at things like higher building code tiers, adopting some version of the BC Sept code. Again, not a lot of details on that. A lot of things in the federal green building strategy are still more conceptual than they are concrete. They're talking about home energy labeling, which is something that we've supported in the past, that giving consumers information about the homes that they're buying relative to the energy that's consumed by that home. Again, the only question around that type of program is how, and how might that disrupt the sales process of homes. So that's something they have to figure out. And finally, they're looking at a phase out in the installation of oil heating systems in new construction as early as 2028. We know that there's not a lot of new construction going on with oil heating systems, so this seems like a pretty soft promise to have that in place by 2028. It seems, anyway, that's a commitment that they've made. So that is the federal green building strategy. There's more to it, but a lot of the details have yet to be revealed, and we've made a commitment at HRAI that we'll continue to engage with NRCan and the people overseeing these programs to make sure that the voice of the industry is heard in program design. Okay, one of the things that they did announce, and it's mentioned in the green building strategy, but hasn't really been talked about very loudly, is the clean technology investment tax credit. And just I have to mention this because it's something that's very much in line with the US approach. Tax incentive, a 30% investment tax credit. Unfortunately, it's only limited to for-profit businesses, not available to homeowners, not available to not-for-profits, but it is now available, and it's retroactive, and it's something that probably could be a significant motivator for businesses. If you're a commercial HVAC contractor, this is something you could really use to help sell certain types of jobs. Credits are available to 2034 is the way they've announced it, and retroactive to last year. So unfortunately, again, many people in the sector don't really know how they work. So we've been talking with Finance Canada about hosting webinars to educate contractors about how to talk to their customers about this program. I want to stop for a minute about talking about this stuff because HRAI has we always say from a government relations standpoint, we're nonpartisan. We're somewhat agnostic on these sorts of things, but we engage with the governments that are in power and try to get the best from them that we can to serve the needs of the industry. And with the government that's been in power for the last 8-9 years, they had certain focuses that could be constructive for the industry, and we've pulled a lot of good things from government as a result of that focus. But we know that the current government is in a weak position, and there's a government in waiting called the Conservative Party of Canada. So there's a question for HRAI and for the industry, and that is, should we be pivoting in our policy stance, in the sorts of things we ask for from government? I'm sure everyone's seen some version of this chart, which is this is a compilation of many polling, public opinion polls that clearly show the Conservative Party of Canada breaking away. If there was an election today, they would win very likely a majority government. So we know that we need to engage, and we have engaged with the government in waiting, led by Leader of the Opposition, Pierre Poilievre. We have met with his office a number of times and talked about key goals for the industry. We've not placed as much of an emphasis on climate action because it's not a priority for the opposition. It's not something they spend a lot of time talking about, so that messaging doesn't necessarily resonate with the leaders of that party. So we talk more about job creation and economic development, which are also things that government spending in our sector could deliver. We're talking about what the interest of small business owners, that's something that resonates. And the question of whether or not we shift away from the positioning we've taken in the last several years, where we went to Ottawa and said our industry is prepared to lead the way on climate action. Do we need to revisit that positioning is a question that we'll be discussing at the upcoming annual HRAI annual meeting. There's a strategic conversation with our boards to talk about if we have to shift our positioning, how do we do that? Do we double down and say, no, this is important principles for the industry, or do we modify it in some way? And we'll see where that goes. But here's the facts. The positioning of climate as a priority for Canadians. This is a poll taken by Abacus in 2021, so just 3 years ago, 3 years ago in a few months. And you can see climate and environment was actually at the time growing. Actually, it should have shown several years worth, but you would have seen that it was rising in status as a vote-getting issue. People wanted to see governments that were proactively addressing their concerns about climate. Not as strong as things like cost of living and access to healthcare and housing. Those are still the big vote getters. Anyone who can deliver policies and programs that speak to those priorities have an edge. But climate was a very important one. And now if we look at more recent data just from this year, so 3 years later, climate change and the environment has dropped significantly from being a priority for 46% down to 23%. And obviously, as everyone knows, read the newspaper, follow politics or polls, the rising cost of living is a top of mind priority for most Canadians, right up to 71%. Housing affordability is still up there. And there's a variety of other issues in the healthcare is still a top priority. But climate action is no longer a top priority, which is one of the reasons you see very few parties spending a lot of time talking about climate action anymore. Meanwhile, at the same time, we are seeing some mixed signals. And this is something we also have to factor into our positioning as an industry. I don't want to dive too deeply on this because this is a little bit of a political discussion, but it's important for us as an industry to try to find the right balance. While most Canadians are focused more on cost of living than they are on climate action, very recent survey shared by Deloitte had a startling statistic which said they've seen a significant increase in the level of concern that leading corporate leaders across the country express about climate change and the effect on the economy. So it's now a concern for 85%, where only a year ago it was a concern for 59%. So that's just an interesting little statistic. In the corporate world, the level of concern is growing. That doesn't mean they necessarily have ideas about how to solve the issue. We also know that the insurance industry is taking a massive hit. There are parts of the US now where you pretty much can't get insurance for property because of flooding and the frequency of flooding. And this may happen in Canada, parts of Canada where we have fires and drought and flooding. This is a trend that we know is only going to get worse. So there are economic impacts which might bring all of this back to focus for political leaders. And recently a study was released. This is apropos of nothing. It really doesn't help in the discussion in Canada, other than this study shows that despite the perception of Canadians, carbon pricing, this is what they call a meta study, where they basically looked at hundreds of studies of where carbon pricing has been introduced around the world in different jurisdictions. They found that on balance, as a policy measure, it does work. It does have the desired effect. Like I said, this study is of no consequence now in Canada because the carbon tax effectively is history. There is no party other than the Liberal Party that stands behind it anymore. Someone said, I heard a joke this morning, someone said even the atmosphere has come out against the carbon pricing. So pretty much everyone it's not a vote getter, it's a vote loser. So it should be considered history. And what that means, both for governments, but also for our industry, is we need to, if governments are going to continue to find ways to reduce carbon emissions, they're going to have to find other tools. And most have said if it's not through pricing signals like the carbon tax or the price on carbon, whatever term you want to use, it might be through regulatory means. It might be through more active government intervention in the choices that people make by eliminating certain technologies. We don't know at this stage, but it does mean all the more reason why, with governments, HRAI and the industry needs to be at the table to avoid programs, policies, and regulations that might be detrimental. So we don't anticipate that any government is going to walk away from action on the climate, because we believe, if anything, it's in maybe a mild recession in terms of levels of interest. It's not going to go away, and it just will take another season of hurricanes or wildfires or other consequential events like that to remind people that there's some issues we have to resolve.
So Martin, we had a quick question, getting back to the grants coming in the spring, asking whether, are they going to go up to 20K in the spring of 2025? Is that confirmed?
It's not confirmed. It's only, this is directionally what they're saying. They're saying the grants will be significantly larger. And yes, the $20,000 was a number that's in the green building strategy, but what that program looks like is completely, I wouldn't commit to making any definitive statements at all. Lots of things can change between now and next April, let's say April. All the more reason why we have to be at the table. And some people might remember that when greener homes was first introduced, the Prime Minister made an announcement in December and they rolled the program out in April. And in the intervening 3 or 4 months, the people at Enercan kind of went into radio silence. They didn't engage with government, with industry, despite our repeated offers to join them, to sit at the table and say, here, we know what good policy looks like, what good programs look like, and we know what bad ones look like. We can help you to craft a rebate program that we think will work for the industry. We've been part of those discussions in the past, and we know from our members what has worked and what hasn't worked. They didn't take us up on that offer until after they announced the program and got a lot of industry noise, a lot of complaining about various aspects of the program. And only at that time did we get invited to sit at the table with them and think about tweaks to the program. We want to avoid that this time around. I'm hoping, counting on Enercan, having learned the lesson on that. We do engage with them regularly now, that they will say, we need you at the table to help us to design programs that will work well for the industry. So we need lots of industry support to do that. that's a long-winded answer to say we really don't know what that program is going to look like. Hopefully, we'll be at the table to help them to design it so that we can have some say in what the right levels are, who should be eligible, what products, what conditions on the sale, things like that. So stay tuned. That's all I can really say is stay tuned. And if you are interested, I would say by all means, contact me, contact our team, let us know what you think good policy looks like. I know for some people they prefer no rebates. I don't think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see some version of that of a new program, but we obviously, there's, like I said before, there's good programs and there's bad ones, and we want to make sure they take the right path. Okay.
I had one additional question. I don't know if you can answer it. Maybe some people in the chat might be able to answer this one better, but it says, with rebates and grants to be made available, what would be the average maintenance cost for customers?
Yeah, I would not have an answer to that question.
Yeah. So I would, I don't know what the maintenance
average maintenance cost. I think we have to talk about that, giving people money just to install a system is one thing. We obviously need to encourage servicing and maintenance on a regular basis. As I already hinted earlier, we already know that there were lots of poor installations done. I've heard from contractors who are real heat pump specialists saying they're keeping really busy fixing poor installations that were done. What that suggests to us is we need a better standard of who can participate in these programs. I'm going to come to that because this is a lot of this is about workforce development. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. What I mean is, channel development, developing contractors who are in a strong position to install and service these systems competently. I think there's a great need for that in the industry, and we need to invest continuously to build up that capacity. Okay, so shall I turn to the next topic? It's connected to the previous, and I'm not the resident expert on the refrigerant transition, but I feel like we can't avoid it. It's also related to the climate discussion, because the driver for the refrigerant transition right now is the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which says we have to eliminate those gases that we have gotten used to using, HFCs, that still have relatively high global warming potential. So that's the climate driver, the policy driver for this. But Canada's not alone. We're part of a global transition. Canada's actually historically, recent history, done better than most other countries. You can see those blue bars are actual consumption of HFCs in Canada. The green line is the phase down schedule. We're not too far in excess of the drop down in 2025 that we're going to see come January. So, but we do have to go through a transition that the industry is going to have to figure this out. And I'll talk a little bit about where we're at on the regulatory side. We'll be moving, obviously, as people know, from A1 refrigerants to what are called A2L refrigerants, which have mild flammability characteristics, but have lower GWP, global warming potential properties. Some of the hurdles to a smooth refrigerant transition, there's just a few. And I'm going to say we have had great progress in the last year, thanks to a concerted effort and a lot of support from our members. We've made great progress in knocking down those hurdles, although they've not all been fully surpassed. We're making great progress. One of the concerns was about the lack of alignment between Canadian and US regulations concerning the phase down. Canada's regulations are called the ozone depleting substances and halocarbon alternative regulations. Once the well, let's just say if Canada and the US aren't aligned, we have a risk of product chain disruptions and certainly lots of industry confusion. There's been a lot of that in the last year and a half. What's happened, the reason for that is that the US, much belatedly relative to almost all other countries in the developed world, didn't regulate on this until late last year, October of last year, when they adopted their technology transition rule. This is the US Environmental Protection Agency. When they did that, they set a whole bunch of new regulations that directly impact manufacturers in the US. And those manufacturer members of HRAI then turn to Canada and say, well, what are you guys doing to align with the US? And our first conversations with Environment and Climate Change Canada they said, well, we've had our regulations in place for 6 or 7 years already. The US is catching up now. But in fact, the US surpassed in some of the levels and some of the specifics of the phase down. They've gone further than Canada did in the iteration of the HRAI regulation. So we prevailed on Environment and Climate Change Canada. We were persistent, and finally they agreed to reopen the regulation. So it's now under review. Some of you might know that. Some of you have helped us in our submissions to Environment and Climate Change Canada. This is a success story, although we're not at the finish line. We now know that the primary goal of reopening those regulations in Canada is a focus on aligning with the US. So that will be hopefully generate a very happy result for manufacturers, but we're not quite there yet. The other aspect that has to be, the other major hurdle is the refrigeration code, which guides the work that refrigeration mechanics can do, what products can be sold, and so on, is defined by CSA B52, the mechanical refrigeration code. And in order for A2L refrigerants to be recognized, or products containing A2L refrigerants to be worked with, B52 has to be adopted in every province. Having it settled at the national level is one thing, but where the regulation has teeth is at the provincial level. So every province has to adopt, for this transition to happen smoothly, has to adopt CSA B52 before the end of this calendar year. Again, the good news is we've been working diligently. HRAI and some of our members have been helping us with this. We've been working diligently to with every province, and every province has a different regulator. In Ontario, it's TSSA. It's literally a different, different departments in almost every province. The good news is we have made significant progress. The green bars indicate we're at the finish line. They have adopted B52. Ontario recently announced that they will be adopting B52 in October. I think it's October 1st. And building code will follow shortly behind. That's the one lingering issue is building codes across the country affecting new home construction need to point to the new version of CSA B52, where A2Ls are permitted. We don't think this will be a major problem, but it could be a complication in some jurisdictions because building codes aren't being switched out as quickly as might be needed. So we might need some exceptions to be offered, or ministerial orders to create clarity that A2L based product can be installed with no regulatory concern. So that's one thing we're working on. Last thing I'll mention quickly, again, beyond my expertise, I'll just say we are also trying to address some shipping and handling concerns for distributors. We have a working group that's been focused on this. We are developing some guidelines for wholesalers on shipping and handling requirements for these refrigerants. And let's just say that's an active file for us. We have the right experts at the table to solve that issue. And the only thing then left really for the industry, this is something I'll just push, is at the ground level, people working with the equipment, the installers and the service people in our industry still need to be educated on the unique properties of these new refrigerants and how they need to be handled differently. So we have developed with a US-based organization a course specifically for Canadian technicians. This is where you can find it. It's an online self-directed course, but it will teach technicians, and again, we're assuming these are qualified technicians, refrigeration mechanics, and so on, who work with equipment, just educating them on the unique properties of A2Ls and what they need to know in their daily work lives. So turning to another transition that, again, I'm going to say is being largely driven by the focus on climate change, is what we would call a workforce transition. And we've been saying, when we talk with NRCan under the Green Building Strategy, those consultations, and prior to that even, there's been literally at least 5 years or more, maybe closer to 8 years of consultations of various types, where our consistent messaging has been to government, if you don't help us to prepare the workforce, then no matter how much money you put into the marketplace and regulatory hurdles and all the rest, whatever you put out there won't result in change if we don't prepare the workforce to deliver on consumer expectations. So we've been saying that we need to not only find more people in our industry to do the work, but we need to train existing workers within the industry to work with these new technologies. And the government's, I'm going to say, maybe accepted some of what we were saying, but one of the conclusions is they felt they needed to prove or see proof that this was going to be a real issue. And so one of the things they did was they commissioned a study by an organization called BuildForce Canada, which does labor market projections. And they said, if we are going to meet our targets to 2030 and 2050, what does that mean in terms of labor market development? Like how many people are we going to need to deliver on those expectations? This is a chart of the expenditures connected to advancing climate action. And you can see it falls into categories of energy efficiency retrofits, fuel switching, renovations, that's the orange, and then fuel switching for new homes, which is a smaller group. That's the kind of dollar investment that will be made over this is just the next 10 years. BuildForce said we can't do a study for 30 years. We can only look at 10 years reasonably. So they're focused on the next 10 years. And they said, in order to meet those demands, these are types of workers we're going to need, the incremental new workers we're going to need between 2023 and 2032. That includes things like trade helpers and laborers. They talked to the new home construction sector and learned that, they said we need a lot of helpers, laborers, basically warm bodies to do the work. That's their greatest workforce challenge. The second category, though, was heating, refrigeration, and air conditioning mechanics. And then there's a long list of others you can see. Proportionally, what this means for our industry is they're basically saying, the BuildForce reports is we need to see close to a 400% increase in the next 10 years in the number of refrigeration and air conditioning mechanics. This is specifically working in the residential sector. That's a mind-boggling number and almost impossible for the industry to deliver. The apprenticeship system, the training system across the country can't deliver those kinds of numbers in 10 years without a lot of investment. So one of the things that BuildForce recommends that's very consistent with work that HRAI has been doing is saying, let's help existing workers in our industry, specifically gas technicians, of which there are many in different parts of the country, and oil burner mechanics in some parts of the country. Let's help them transition to be competent, qualified heat pump installers. And in order to do that, we need to determine what the gap is in skills between what they currently can demonstrate as competent gas technicians versus what the industry needs from a competent heat pump installer and service person. And to determine what that bar needs to be, we put together a committee of technical experts with manufacturers, trainers, contractors who have been active in this space for many years, even someone from the union who have a very good understanding of the training needs for the commercial sector and residential. And we developed basically a bar that we expect competent installers and service persons to meet. And then we just completed this study, the first part of the study, where we enrolled 93. We were looking for 100. We didn't quite get 100 gas technicians. We found 93 who were willing to go through an assessment to determine how their current level of skills lines up against what the industry is going to be looking for. And that gap, it tells us what they know and, more importantly, what they don't know. And the gap, we are taking that information once the report is completed, and we're going to distribute that to the training world, colleges, training providers, to say, can you develop training to help people overcome this gap? That's a really important element. And then the challenge beyond that, this is all in an effort to help people move down that path of becoming competent heat pump installers and service persons. We've also asked the federal government for funding to help. So NRCan and Environment Climate Change Canada are funding that skills gap analysis. They've agreed to do that. We got that commitment. We've asked for further funding from Employment Social Development Canada to help cover the actual costs of training. And we need that, we believe, because most of the people who might be candidates for retraining and upskilling in the industry, they have jobs and they have families to feed, and and their employers might be a little bit reluctant to let them go off to school for any amount of time, 2-3 months or whatever it might take, to become a heat pump service person. So we said to the federal government, if you want to help us move the workforce down this pathway, you need to help by covering the cost of that training, including the cost of taking a time away from the job. So amazingly, we made a submission last February, and we talked about that. We said, this is a remaining need. This is a hurdle for the industry. It's the cost of training. We asked for a $100 million fund over 10 years to subsidize the cost of reskilling those workers. And back to this, about a month or almost 2 months after we made that budget request, they announced the Sustainable Jobs Training Fund. So that was almost a direct response to our request of government, and it's a good example of them hearing the need that we expressed on behalf of the industry. But they're not giving HRAI $100 million. They're saying we have a $100 million fund. It's mainly aimed at HVACR, mainly residential, and they're also allocating a certain amount for the automotive sector. And they invited HRAI and others to apply to access that fund, which we have done. And we won't hear whether we have a good result on that till December, but we're hopeful that if we do gain access to that fund, we'll be able to channel financial support to employers, residential HVAC contractors, to help cover the costs to get their employees retrained to be successful heat pump installers. We also are working actively just on the workforce side of things to draw more people into the industry. We've developed a career ambassadors program, involved in a variety of events like Level Up that's across Ontario, Skills Canada competitions across the country. And this is all about trying to find more young people who might see an opportunity to work in our industry. And the focus on heat pumps, the focus on taking action on climate has become a real draw for young people. It's actually become a real point of attraction. People say this is an industry that's actually doing some constructive things. So we need to build on that. And that's a whole program that we've put out there just to help bring in the numbers. Finally, I want to talk about a program called Heat Pump Champions, because we've had a challenge in the last few years. HRAI said, we're finding ways to support this emphasis on climate action. We're, helping to find training, or like all the stuff I've been talking about up to now. And the challenge is lots of advocates, municipalities, provincial governments, environmental groups, lots of different people who are promoting heat pumps as a good solution for consumers. They know about HRAI and they send consumers to our membership. They'll say, go to the HRAI contractor locator. And then we get calls or letters or emails saying, well, we brought in 3 HRAI members and they all tried to talk us out of a heat pump. So we learned that probably still the majority of our contractor membership aren't heat pump champions. They aren't comfortable with the technology. To help that, we've done things like the heat pump symposium. Some of you might have been attending those events where we talk a little bit about the technology and eliminate some of the myths that exist. But we also recognize that we need to find a way for consumers who have an interest, identify those contractors who have made the commitment to being, in quotation marks, heat pump champions, right? So we developed this brand. We're inviting members to be part of that. There are some strict criteria to be a member. You need to show that you have competent, qualified technicians. You need to show that you have the backing of manufacturers, that you like a recommendation from a manufacturer. There's a variety of criteria, but the reward will be that if the program is successful, and so far we've not really signed up too many. I think we're probably only about 15 or 20 contractors in Ontario. We have people like Toronto Hydro and even the IESO saying, if you build this, we will point our next incentive programs, we'll direct people to go and use an HRAI heat pump champion. So that would be the payoff for anyone who invests in becoming a member of that network. But it's still very, very tentative right now. We're just trying to build it up. And it's a way of incentivizing contractors, business owners, to make the investment in shifting their business and training their people and so on to become to have success going forward in the world of decarbonized world. Okay, so that's all the climate related work that we've been doing. One thing I'll just mention just in closing is we know, and kind of following this a little bit, is there's a little bit of a trend. We've seen this in the past, waves of investment in the industry, but there is some evidence now that our industry, the HVAC industry, is ripe for consolidation. We know that the industry is still dominated by many small players. I mean, mainly here, the contracting sector, easily 9,000 in Canada, more than 100,000 in the US. And the industry is still seeing steady growth, many new market opportunities, some of them related to what I've been describing here, that if we're going to transform all homes and buildings to be lower carbon, that's an enormous business opportunity for our industry. And companies, investment firms that have deep pockets see that. They say there's a lot of money to be made here. Maybe we need to invest in the HVAC industry. There's a variety of new solutions available, more and more technically complex solutions. There's more and more public awareness about things like energy efficiency, indoor air quality, and so on. So this is a ripe opportunity for new sources of capital, including utilities, seeking investment opportunities to invest in our sector. Here's a couple of studies that I've seen recently that say, there's going to be a lot more of this. Here's some data from the US. I didn't dive too deeply on this. There's more and more of this happening, and just this far right bar is just the first quarter of 2024. They're expecting another resurgence back to the levels of 2021, 2022 in new capital that's coming into the industry. That number is $373 billion. So these are some big dollars. Some of these companies on the screen are US based, but a couple of them are active in Canada. Right Time, you might recognize they've been buying companies and they're on track to keep going. They're trying to build up a significant presence in Canada. Some of you are aware of Enbridge Sustain, the utility affiliate that's now looking to gain a significant share of the market in Ontario. Again, they see opportunity, and most of the opportunity they see is around heat pumps. It's happening in the US. We expect that more of this will happen in Canada. And just finishing that off, for an organization like HRAI, it begs the question, do we move with the times? And I don't have a strong opinion about this. It's just a question that we're going to have to answer at some point. Is HRAI, when it comes to contractors, are we primarily focused on smaller, disadvantaged contractors, or should we just adapt and change with the industry? This is an industry that has not gone through a significant consolidation. Unlike, if you look at almost every other industry, you'll see significant trends to bigger and fewer companies. We've not seen that to the same degree in Canada in the HVAC sector until now. And again, one of the main drivers here, it would appear, is the interest in the role of our industry in addressing the climate challenge. So those are some of the trends that I've been seeing lately, and some of the things that HRAI has been doing to address, to work with governments to support rather than harm the industry. I'll leave it at that. And Mark, I don't know, I'll turn it back to you unless there's any questions. I may not have time for questions, but
you have a few minutes. We do have a few minutes for questions, and there are some. Some I'm not sure whether you can answer, and they might be better left to some of our other presenters, more technical presenters afterwards, but some you may be able to. Sure. The first one was about the TSSA. Are they now looking after refrigeration over 5 tons? I'm told they need to witness pressure tests. I don't know if you know anything about that or heard anything.
I'll defer that one to somebody else, but TSSA is the regulator having jurisdiction on Ontario, so they are the ones who have have to adopt B52. They've now done so or committed to having it in place by October 1st. What that means practically speaking, I'm going to say that's where the training comes in. People need to do training on how to handle A2L refrigerants. It'll be the answers to those questions will be defined by B52, but a lot of that will be reflected in the training that we've made available.
Yeah, and like in our next presenter, maybe because she from Mitsubishi or someone like that might have that answer as well. So I would say stick around to we have some technical presenters who probably know that answer. So we also asked, where can we find heat pump technical training in BC? Any particular spot we could find that? Did you know in BC?
BCIT, BC Institute of Technology has some training. They've been funded to develop training to assist people who have an interest in heat pumps. I'm going to say it's not particularly in depth. We've had a long-standing discussion, not long-standing, but it's been about 3 or 4 years running about how the province of British Columbia should regulate in this area, what the minimum requirements should be for competent heat pump installers. And let's say it's not a resolved question as yet. We've been advocating at HRAI with limited success that maybe they consider a version of the two-tiered trade that exists in Manitoba and in Ontario as a potentially a partial solution, at least to the residential sector, because it is a concern. Heat pumps have become very, very popular in British Columbia. There is not a significant population of refrigeration mechanics in that province to deliver on the expectations of homeowners. So that gap, that 400% increase, it's even more pronounced in British Columbia in the residential sector specifically, because there's not a long history of air conditioning in residential in that province. So there isn't a huge population of contractors to serve those needs. Contractors who can do it are going to do really well, but they'll also complain they don't have enough technicians on hand to do the work. So BCIT is rising to the occasion. There are organizations like the Home Performance Stakeholder Council that are working on this. I know City of Vancouver, there's a bunch of different agencies that are investing money in training to help contractors make that journey.
And I would add that a lot of manufacturers and wholesalers also offer technical training, maybe specifically on their products, but it's also a place that you can get some training. We promote a lot of training. We have a training site called trainingtrades.ca where you can find training near you or for you as well. That we're just kind of in the middle of relaunching, so that could be a source. But also talk to the presenters this afternoon. They all run training programs as well, so you can learn from them as well.
I'll just add one quick thing, Mark, that I'm not sure I said it before, but the gap analysis that we just finished the intake. So we have all the data now that we need to crunch and to develop a report that says this is what the gap looks like in Ontario. I will say that other jurisdictions, including British Columbia, have been very, very interested in seeing the results of that study and might ask to have a similar study done in BC. Similarly, on the East Coast, there's interest because the base level of competence for the typical technician might be different in that region than it is in Ontario. But even the initial report from Ontario is of interest to help guide where trainers have to focus their efforts. Like, what are the training needs that people have in the industry? Let's not just assume what people don't know. Let's actually ask them. And that's what our skills gap assessment does. It actually assesses very precisely what their training needs are. So that'll be of great interest to training providers. And I think you'll see a bit of a surge in training availability once that document is shared.
And then Rodrigo was asking about the marine HVAC industry. Again, I don't think Martin will know, and I don't know either. I guess I also think probably our other presenters might have some better ideas, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah,
so
I will plead ignorance on that one. It's out of scope for me, for sure.
Yeah, and Frank was mentioning how about most heat pump manufacturers from China? I think that was it was. But there's manufacturers all around the world for heat pumps, I know. So yes, there are definitely a lot from China, but there's ones from.
I had another topic, but we don't have time, and it's very potentially a controversial topic, and that is what might happen with the proliferation of heat pumps in terms of supply coming out of the U.S. versus China.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Yeah.
There are going to be shifts in supply chains. We know that it's happening now. What we do about it is a question. Like someone asked me not long ago, why the U.S. government and the Canadian government are imposing tariffs on electric vehicles made in China. Shouldn't they do the same for heat pumps made in China? And we don't weigh in on that. That's not something for HRAI to take a position on, but that kind of thinking might happen because it's coming in at a lower price point and so on and so forth. But that's the sort of thing we typically don't weigh in on. That's we'd have to take the temperature of the industry, how they feel about a question like that. But it might be a question that the industry gets asked if our federal government, or in line with the U.S. government, takes a America first or a Canada or a North America first kind of approach. That might have implications for the products that we'll be selling in the marketplace.
Yeah, and we're out of time. We had one last question, but which is any more info on the money, the grant rebate, and we just don't have it yet. I guess it hasn't been released yet. So I think you just have to stay tuned. They're just there's no information as of yet. So
that's right.
But Martin, I want to thank you very much for coming on. It was wonderful to get kind of an overview of where things stand with our whole decarbonization shift politically and with grants and rebates and workforce and everything. So very much appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So the other session should be ready to start. We have Carlos Flores from Napoleon doing retrofitting a furnace AC to a furnace heat pump combination, more on the residential side. And then on the commercial side, we have decarbonizing domestic hot water using CO2 heat pumps with Kashif Mohammed from Mitsubishi. So please enter those sessions as based on your interest, and thanks for coming.